Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome.
Thank you.
I came here from Norwich Police Department, where I spent the last 3 years serving as their detective and as their school resource officer. It's kind of a liaison to help build community relations between the school and the police department and the community, but also to help increase safety options. At the Norwich Police Department, we believe that all of our officers are community officers. We really believe in that concept, the essence of protect and serve. And it does not matter if you're an evening patrol, a day patrol, a sergeant, or the chief of police. Everyone here truly believes the embodiment of the essence of the community, and in that we serve.
Great.
I'm the new girl on the block.
You're the new girl on the block?
Well, we've been here for about 4 weeks, and although I truly miss my community that I spent the last 3 years with, I'm blessed to have had an opportunity to get to know some really fabulous people here in the town of Norwich. I spent a lot of time over at the Berrien Cross School with the kids, spent a lot of time over at the library getting to know different community members, and just walking around on the beat, passing people through, whether it be out on the street or in the different businesses. So I kind of took a different path. Most of the police officers that I know, they, from the age of 5 years old, have always wanted to be a police officer.
That's what I meant.
I'm not one of those individuals.
Okay.
I fell into law enforcement. When I say fell in, I fell into love with law enforcement. I started out my early career. I grew up both in Maine and Florida. I went to college in Massachusetts, where I earned a political science degree and pre-law degree. And I thought for sure that was the direction I was heading. And very quickly I took a summer opportunity with an opportunity to teach. I taught, and man, I just knew it was the right spot for me to be. So I spent the next 5 years teaching high school social studies, and after a considerable amount of time teaching high school social studies, I learned it's a lot of the same thing as law enforcement. It's a lot of education, a little bit of discipline and redirection sometimes, but the only difference is I get to wear the cool bat belt now. Other than that, pretty much the same career, same degree field. I left from there and I went over to Plymouth State University, where I got a Master's of Education, a Certificate of Advanced Graduate Studies in Education, and I just recently, last year, obtained a Doctorate of Educational Leadership, also from Plymouth State University. Looking at how do we teach people, how do people learn, what can we do best to try and, specifically looking at andragogy, how do adults learn in that process? From there, I went into law enforcement, and I've been in law enforcement. I did 10 years with the Plymouth State Police in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
As I was a young teacher in a high school social studies class, I had a gentleman walk into my classroom with a loaded 9mm handgun. It was the first time I'd ever seen a gun in my life, and first time I'd ever held one.
In your classroom?
He walked into my classroom. Fortunately, I was able to convince the student to turn the weapon over to myself. We were able to resolve the crisis. This was immediately after Columbine happened. So the student turned the weapon over to me. We were able to keep everybody safe, but that created for me a connection with our local law enforcement agency. And one thing led to another, and I ended up applying for a police department position and made the switch over from education, specifically student-based education in a career field, over to law enforcement. You know, I think everyone takes a different path to find out where they're going to end up being. And one thing I found is every career field or every job I've had, whether it was working as a building service worker in college, cleaning toilets, to I spent a lot of time through my summer programs waiting tables. It's all about, if you love the job you're in, it's not really a job. And although it seems like a circuitous route, everything feels like it kind of built to this moment. The teaching career helped me with communication, to be able to interact with people of all different levels and ages. So I think the best part about it is you never know where you'll end up. Who knows what job or career field you could be in 3 years or 5 years from now. So I don't think those things really influenced my career a lot at that point. It was more, let's see where things take me through. I ended up meeting my husband when I was in my education degree, completed my degree process through, like I said, through my master's, through my bachelor's. Yeah, I think it was that interaction with law enforcement, having an opportunity to realize that you can truly make a difference every day. Every day you walk away from here, you legitimately make a difference. Having that first taste of that really kind of showed me that it was something I'd like to spend a career field and a lifetime doing. So I spent a lot of time in Florida. That's where my family is, my parents, and the rest of my family live down there. And then I also spent a lot of time up north in a small community as well. So it was about 10 or 11 times the size of Norwich. Yeah. So I've always found same places, same problems, same issues, same benefits, just on a different scale. One of the benefits of working in a small community is you get to know everyone. And I think that's one of the biggest differences I find between an area like Florida, Boynton Beach specifically. You could drive down the street, and pass 500 cars and not know a single one. Here the benefit is I drive down South Main Street and every third car I get an opportunity to wave to because I met them the other day at Dan and Witt's, or I happened to stop by and we checked in when we were working on a Peeps diorama for the library. So I think that's the biggest difference I see. Nope, I had an opportunity for a job and I applied for a teaching position up here. I was offered a teaching position and I took it. You know, I think each state has its own unique complexities to it.
It does.
Absolutely enjoyed it, and then I had the opportunity to transition over to law enforcement. I attended the 142nd New Hampshire Police Academy. I think I have an opportunity to be able to create a greater good and make a difference every day in a way that's different than I was as an educator. We don't just watch and assess anymore, we're proactive. The reactive police departments really don't exist anymore because we found that that's not the most effective way to really serve your community. Really what we're looking to do is, the best way to serve the community is you find those issues, you find those concerns, and you mitigate them before they become problems. It is similar, you referred to education as highly verbal, highly interactive. I believe that's what we do in law enforcement. There isn't a day out there that you can't find me walking the streets. Not a day out there you don't find me having a conversation, whether it's with somebody over at Remax, jumping into a department meeting at Bayada, or I'm down the street over at Dan and Witt's, or over at the Norwich Inn, having coffee, sitting back and forth on a rocker, talking with people from the community. I believe that as a police officer, it's not our job to just sit out there and watch. There's an element of that, being out there to see what's different. But you learn a whole lot more by engaging with your community, being highly interactive, engaging in that verbal conversation. That's what helps you to find the problems, the issues, the concerns, and also to learn what you're doing well, what works. That way we can replicate it. I think I had the benefit of being able to couple what I learned at the academy with what I learned in my education career field. And so really learning about how do people learn, how do people interact, and how do they engage with one another. And that's a great example of just an opportunity to sit together with members of the community. And sometimes this uniform is not always the friendliest and most inviting element of our job. And people can, at times, find it difficult to walk up to a police cruiser or walk up to someone in uniform and ask them those questions that they've had. You change that just slightly by going to a women's club meeting and having a cup of coffee. Makes it easier to approach, engage in conversation. Once people know you, they're more willing to walk up to the cruiser and say, so hypothetically, I had a question, and really be able to reach with you and engage. That's our job as police, is to be these community caretakers, and we can't do that if we separate ourselves. So this is our microphone so we can engage in conversation with dispatch. The dispatch is the one who lets us know where the community concerns are. If someone calls or accidentally dials 911 and hangs up, if someone comes home and they didn't remember leaving their door ajar, but they noticed it was ajar, they'll contact dispatch, and dispatch gets to us through the radio. Policing has changed a lot in the last century or so. Technology has really brought us to a different level. Just like cell phones have changed and other forms of communication, so has the technology for law enforcement. We have a lot of different tools on our belt, which just helps to give us more options when engaging in situations. While we hope to never have to use most of it, it's good to know that it's there in case we ever do. So over here you have the radio that I mentioned earlier. This is a baton, which is an expandable baton. In addition to that, we have some additional ammunition. We have what's called OC, which is a police version of pepper spray. We have our firearm. In the back we have 2 sets of handcuffs. And then we also have a glove pouch that enables us to be able to, if we have come to a scene where somebody, for example, is bleeding or has had some concerns or issues, it's just protective gear for us as an officer. We wear a ballistic vest underneath our uniforms, and that just helps protect us in the event that we ever are involved in an active shooter incident or anything. It can also protect you from some knives and some other wear.
So that is...
It has a rifle plate inside, and again, it's just designed, I hope to never ever actually need my vest, but it's good to know that it's there just in case. It's kind of like a seatbelt. You wear it every day just in case, but you hope to never actually have to need it.
Great.
Oh, my family's been very supportive. My husband is also in the field of law enforcement. He's a chief of police, so it wasn't a hard sell to him. Our kids certainly are understanding of that, and my parents and the rest of my family were very supportive of that process. He was a sergeant at the time. He's now the chief of police. This is the 3rd community I've served in. As I mentioned earlier, I went through the New Hampshire Police Academy, and that's where I started my law enforcement career. I began there with the Plymouth State Police over in New Hampshire. It's in the very center of the state. It's a much larger community than where we are here. Most of that is because it houses Plymouth State University, which is the 2nd largest educational institution in the state. It brings about 100,000 faculty, staff, students, visitors at any time throughout that year. While there, I served both as a detective, we called it an investigator at that time, and as their emergency management director. I left that community after 10 years there and went to Windsor, which is over in Vermont, just not too far from here, and served as a detective and as their school resource officer. And now I have the opportunity to take what I've learned from those communities and bring it across over to Norwich. So in this team here, I come through as a sergeant, and the role of the sergeant is kind of that intermediary supervisor. So at the Norwich Police Department, we have 2 other patrol officers. We have both Frank and Anna, who have been here for several years, both of them. We have the chief of police, he's at the top, and I'm right in the middle of both of those. So I have the opportunity to be a supervisor, but also to be able to look to the chief for a lot of mentorship and leadership from his position as he guides me through the process as well. I make it my duty to try to get out and know as many people as possible. Again, if we're going to protect and serve the community, we need to know who they are. Sure. So we do this thing called High Five Friday, where as the students come through, they come through the crosswalk, or I see them over at the school, we just do a high five as they're coming by. The idea behind it is really just breaking down barriers.
Oh, yeah.
Too many times people only see law enforcement when something bad has happened. It's not very often you call the police and say, hey, I had a great day, you want to come over? Typically we come over because unfortunately people have experienced a bad situation, or they themselves have made a poor choice which puts them interacting with us in law enforcement. I believe it's important for people to see us on the good times too. And that's one of the things I like about the crosswalk opportunity is you get to high five the kids coming through, you get to stop at the school, jump into an art class, or maybe just play a little basketball out at recess. And it creates a bond where you're engaging with people in a positive atmosphere. We did have a situation, a couple of students who who were supposed to take the bus home really wanted to do the crosswalk high five. So they actually left, they came to the crosswalk, they high fived their way across the crosswalk, turned around, came back across the crosswalk for another set of high fives, and then jumped on the school bus to take them home. So, you know, it's a great opportunity. It shows us that the kids are really engaging, but certainly a funny one as well. We'll head out on the road here and go visit town. I think one of the best parts about working in a small community like Norwich is you really have the opportunity to get to know each of the individuals here. So each day I try to spend at least 30 minutes, like I said, over here at the school, getting to know some of our youngest community members. Whether it's a little bit of time on the basketball court, sometimes it's tossing around a football. The other day we even got to play cops and robbers, which was a modified version of tag, so I had a lot of fun with that.
You're going to have to watch out. You're going to have the whole school body wanting to be policemen.
You know, not a bother at all. We hope actually to be able to instill some positive career fields, always looking for the next law enforcement officer. In fact, fortunately I just started the Norwich Police Cadet Program, which is a program designed for 13 to 18-year-olds interested in the career field of law enforcement. I had started the program over in Windsor, and I'm bringing over about 4 of those students to join in. And it's a really great community service opportunity, and they get to really kind of delve into the career field. Here, what is it like to do radar? How do you do entry into a residence if somebody calls 911? There's cadet programs all across the country. I run this specific cadet program, and I'm responsible for coming up with the different programs, the meetings, the community service. But cadet programs have been around for a long time. Another new program initiative we've done is something called the Lunch Bunch Crew. And the Lunch Bunch Crew meets on Mondays, and I go over and have lunch with some of the students at the school. And it's really designed for students we talk about social, emotional, and behavioral. Look at communication and engagement with other individuals. It was designed so that those students who feel like I just don't have anybody to sit with at lunch, or maybe I just really need a friend and I'm not sure how to start that conversation. It kind of helps students to be able to find some small social groupings to build those relationships with one another. Our hope is that we can start to train them well when they're young, and when they're old, they'll continue to build off of that. I always look at, I say, Norwich has always kind of been one of those police departments that's a step ahead of some of the others. Revolutionary in the styles and the approaches. And that's one of the best things that we have here. The chief. No, just I think law enforcement, like I said, is changing. It's a changing face of technology, and so we are facing new problems and dilemmas that we've never faced before. And I think the key really for us is staying up on the training. And some of that's going up to the Vermont Police Academy, some of that's going to other locations as well. Next week I have the great opportunity to go with our state's attorney's office. The state's attorney's office are the ones who are responsible for all prosecution in Windsor County. And we'll be going over to Washington, D.C., where we are going to participate in a training, and we'll be doing the training for all law enforcement officers in the state of Vermont regarding elder abuse investigations. So a really neat opportunity, and I think a feather in the cap for Norwich Police Department that we're going to be part of that. We are really training the trainers for the next generation and looking at an area that hasn't necessarily gotten a lot of law enforcement training in the past, and we're seeing elder abuse investigations have changed the way that we're restructuring those, so I'm excited to be a part of that new opportunity. If I'm not on a police call, I'm out driving the different roads. I actually had a citizen ask me, is there something wrong? And I said, no. I said, I'm just out here checking the neighborhood, checking the communities. And so even though you might not be busy back to back with calls, there's always something for you to do out there. I figure if I can go up and I can become familiar with your house and I know your community, it means that when there's an emergency, I know exactly where I'm going. I know what door predominantly that you might use. It also tells me that 3 days ago I was up on this street and I noticed something was different, and today there's a different car in the driveway. If the next day you report a burglary, I can remember, hey, there was a red Jeep there that's not normally there, and it might help us to be able to identify who the perpetrators are. But we stay pretty busy running the gamut. I always say that typically the emergencies that happen, we have a lot of medical issues and concerns, some 911 calls and hang-ups, some burglaries, a couple of thefts here and there. But really I find that Norwich is generally a very safe community. In fact, I would call it a crime of opportunity is typically what we see. Might be somebody who leaves their laptop out, goes to grab a cup of coffee, when they come back their laptop is missing. In general, Norwich is a very safe place to live, and we're fortunate to work in such an environment. Every town has its own unique issues or concerns. Certainly when I worked in Plymouth, that's an environment that's populated predominantly with 18 to 21-year-olds who are on their own for the first time, experimenting with different substance abuse, trying to figure out finances, trying to learn how to live in the same place as a roommate for the first time in their life. So I think that lent itself to a different type of problems and a different type of criminal activities that we saw. And again, the last 3 years I was over at Windsor, predominantly as a school resource officer, which meant I dealt with a lot of juvenile crimes, addressing issues with our youngest of kiddos, and then how that connected up with their families. So I think every community has its own special kind of niche, I would say. I'm excited here to see, been here 4 weeks, but looking forward to see what Norwich's little niche is and how I can best serve to protect them here.
Situation?
I'm fortunate that I have not had to actually utilize my firearm. I hope to never have to. In fact, if you talk to most law enforcement officers, they'll finish their entire career without ever having to shoot their firearm. I hope to be one of those officers.
Yeah.
It's there if we need it, and if that day and time comes, then we'll be ready. But like I said, if we can avoid that, we're going to do everything we can to try and best utilize the other tools we have available. In fact, most of the time I find for law enforcement that using what we call verbal judo, which is engaging in people verbally, you can generally achieve the end goal without having to utilize force to make that happen. An example might be that you might have an individual who, for example, does not want to provide you with their driver's license or information when they are engaged in a motor vehicle stop. Or maybe you have somebody who is under arrest and they don't want to get in the cruiser. It's easier in some ways to physically force somebody to do that, but not the method that we really prefer here. We employ a conversational method, which is explaining to somebody the reason that we need something or the reason that we need them to engage in that activity. While there's not always time in emergency situations, we try here at Norwich Police to really spend the time to help people to understand why we're doing something and the way that we're doing it. I think one of the biggest misconceptions I can see is if somebody has the unfortunate situation to get pulled over in a motor vehicle stop, they always feel like it's taken forever. What is that cop doing back there? And what they don't realize is there's a lot of boxes we got to fill in. We're sometimes waiting for information from dispatch who could be on the phone with 911. And the nice thing about having a low call volume here is it allows us to really be able to tell people what we're doing, why we're doing it, and engage in that conversation. We don't need to resort to violence or force most of the time in order to achieve the end goal. Most of the time we can have a conversation with somebody and explain to them the reason. Once people see that, usually they understand and they're willing to provide, let's say, their driver's license in a motor vehicle stop.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you work rotating shifts, nights, weekends, holidays. You think that you're getting off shift, and then a motor vehicle crash happens or an incident occurs. There's a missing juvenile. And so suddenly you thought you were going home, but now you're going to be 2 or 3 hours late for dinner. For some, that could be challenging to understand. The benefit of having a spouse in law enforcement is that he truly understands the system where we are, and is willing to say, yep, I've been there, I've done that. I understand you can't come home for a couple of hours. So I look at it as a real benefit. We also serve, I think, as a great resource for one another. That way I'm able to provide him with some information on New Hampshire law enforcement, and he can provide some for me on Vermont law enforcement as well. We'll bring you back here to the PD.
Well, this is terrific.
We also serve, I think, as a great resource for one another. That way I'm able to provide him with some information on New Hampshire law enforcement, and he can provide some for me on Vermont law enforcement as well.